Oh, Sherlock! What on earth are you doing?
Apologies for awakening you, Watson. I was unfortunate enough to find Mrs. Hudson stood over me like I am with you.
So, of course, you felt the need to spread that unsettling behaviour?
Why not? You slept in that chair all night.
Yes, I'm not surprised. I was looking over our cases from the last 8 years.
Why only 8? Aren't we coming up to 10 years now?
Oh, don't say that, Holmes. I don't want to feel old.
Aging is natural, Watson.
Quite, but I don't need reminding of it. So why did Mrs. Hudson wake you up?
A letter from a client. Mrs. Hudson said, a young lady has arrived in a considerable state of excitement who insists upon seeing me.
Then please read.
I have just told you the contents of the letter. The woman in question is sat downstairs awaiting my calling.
Then please call her, Holmes. I do not wish to be a hindrance to your investigations.
Not at all, Watson.
Holmes went downstairs to collect the woman, whilst I quickly moved our third chair into position. Holmes entered with the woman, who was shivering and shrouded in a veil. We all sat down and waited to hear her story.
You look cold, madam. Please, shuffle closer to the fire.
It is not the cold that makes me shiver, Mr. Holmes.
Then what?
Fear. It is terror. Allow me to raise my veil.
There you are. Now, you must not fear. We shall set matters right, I have no doubt.
Thank you.
You came in by train this morning, I see.
Excuse me? You know who I am?
I do not. I have, however, noticed the second half of your return ticket in the palm of your left glove. You must have started early, and yet you had a good drive over to my establishment from the train station.
I...
There is no mystery, madam.
I don't understand.
You get used to it.
The left arm of your jacket has a mud splash over the shoulder piece, indicating that you got into a motor car at the next train station. Motor cars are quite expensive at this time, indicating that you have wealth.
But the mud...
Well, the train station is awfully muddy, and it's very busy. Accidents are bound to happen where either a carriage or a motor car splashed up in your direction.
And the fact that I used a motor car...
The slight tinge of ash on your veil. Your face is completely clean, yet the veil has ash of the engine's output, indicating that you approached the motor car from behind it in full face of the exhaust.
That was incredible!
Thank you.
I took the train from Leatherhead and took the first train of the day to London, Waterloo.
So whatever this case may be, it is indeed urgent to arrive here so early.
Quite, Mr. Holmes. For I fear you are the last person I can turn to.
Go on.
I have no one to turn to. You see, aside from one poor fellow in my life, but he is of little aid. I have heard of you, Mr. Holmes, from Mrs. Farintosh, from whom you helped in her hour of need.
Farintosh, yes. I recall the case. It was regarding an opal tiara. Do you recall, Watson?
I do indeed, Holmes.
Could you help me? Or at the very least, throw a little light through the dense darkness which surrounds me. At present, it is out of my power to reward you for your services. But in a month or 6 weeks, I shall be married with the control of my own income. And then, at least, you shall not find me ungrateful.
Not a problem, madam. Now, please continue with your story.
My name is Helen Stoner. I am currently living with my stepfather, who happens to be the last survivor of one of the oldest Saxon families in England, otherwise known as the Roylotts of Stoke Moran.
It does sound familiar.
The Roylott family were once the richest in England until the land dispute.
I think I read about this in the Times newspaper.
You may well have. The separation of the borders.
Yes, they had land crossing Berkshire, Hampshire and further north.
Exactly. However, the dispute was across the 4 heads of the family. None of them came out of the situation well, and the family was left in ruins.
Why the dispute?
Power, I suspect.
Right again, Dr. Watson. Their greed caused the local councils to become involved and dissolve the assets. Nothing was left save a few acres of ground and a 300-year-old house, which in itself was abandoned after a heavy mortgage.
So the land was lost?
Yes. The last squire dragged out his life there, living the horrible life of an aristocratic pauper. However, his son, who is my stepfather, saw a few opportunities to find wealth. He was able to gain some references from close friends, which enabled him to take a medical degree and get away from the house.
Where did he study?
Calcutta. Upon his return from gaining his qualification, he found that a string of robberies had taken place in the house, which was now in a worsened state. In a fit of anger, my stepfather beat the butler to death for his failure.
Goodness, well, I hope your stepfather saw justice for this.
He narrowly escaped a capital sentence. He did, however, serve a long term of imprisonment and afterwards returned to England a morose and disappointed man.
I see. Where was he imprisoned?
He was captured in India, and an agreement was made that Dr. Roylott would serve his sentence there. The prisons were quite harsh.
One can imagine.
Whilst in prison, he and my mother fell in love. My mother was the young widow of my father, Major General Stoner of the Bengal Artillery. My sister Julia and I were twins, and we were only 2 years old at the time of my mother's remarriage. She had a considerable sum of money, not less than £1,000 a year, and this she bequeathed to Dr. Roylott entirely while we resided with him, with the provision that a certain annual sum should be allowed to each of us in the event of our marriage.
Fascinating. Pray, continue.
My mother died shortly after our return to England.
Of natural causes?
Nothing as hostile as a murder, Mr. Holmes. She was killed in a railway accident near Crewe, almost 8 years ago.
I am so very sorry for your loss, Miss Stoner.
Thank you, Doctor. My stepfather abandoned his attempts to establish himself in a practice in London and took us to live with him in the old ancestral house at Stoke Moran. The money which my mother had left was enough for all our wants, and there seemed to be no obstacle to our happiness. But a terrible change came over our stepfather about this time. Instead of making friends and exchanging visits with our neighbours, who had at first been overjoyed to see a Roylott of Stoke Moran back in the old family seat, he shut himself up in his house and would occasionally shout at the passers-by in the street.
So he became the irrational type, anxious, paranoid.
Violence of temper, approaching mania, has been hereditary in the men of the family, and in my stepfather's case it had, I believe, been intensified by his long residence in the tropics. A series of disgraceful brawls took place, 2 of which ended in the police court, until at last he became the terror of the village, and the folks would fly at his approach, for he is a man of immense strength and absolutely uncontrollable in his anger.
Grief can change a man, especially when it is one's wife.
You can imagine from what I say that my poor sister Julia and I had no great pleasure in our lives. No servant would stay with us, and for a long time we did all the work of the house. But she was but 30 at the time of her death, and yet her hair had already begun to whiten, even as mine has.
Your sister? Dead? What happened?
That is exactly why I'm here. She died 2 years ago. You can understand that, living the life which I have described. We were little likely to see anyone of our own age and position. We had, however, an aunt, my mother's maiden sister, Honoria, in Westfield, who lived near Harrow, and we were occasionally allowed to pay short visits at this lady's house. Julia went there at Christmas 2 years ago, and met there a half-pay major of Marines, to whom she became engaged. My stepfather learned of the engagement when my sister returned, and offered no objection to the marriage. But within a fortnight of the day which had been fixed for the wedding, the terrible event occurred which has deprived me of my only companion.
You suspect your stepfather?
I do.
Be precise with the details, Miss Stoner. I am intrigued.
I can do that easily, for every event of that dreadful time is seared into my memory. The manor house is, as I have already said, very old, and only one wing is now inhabited. The bedrooms in this wing are on the ground floor, the sitting rooms being in the central block of the buildings. Of these bedrooms, the first is Dr. Roylott's, the second my sister's, and the third my own. There is no communication between them, but they all open out into the same corridor.
Yes?
The windows of the 3 rooms open out upon the lawn. That fatal night, Dr. Roylott had gone to his room early, though we knew that he had not retired to rest, for my sister was troubled by the smell of the strong Indian cigars which it was his custom to smoke. She left her room, therefore, and came to mine, where she sat for some time, chatting about her approaching wedding. At 11 o'clock, she rose to leave me, but she paused at the door and looked back. Tell me, Helen, have you ever heard anyone whistle in the dead of night? Never. What about you? Do you whistle perhaps in your sleep? Certainly not. As you know, I'm a light sleeper. Why, Julia, what's wrong? Helen, for the last few nights, I have always, about 3 in the morning, heard a low, clear whistle. I'm a light sleeper, like yourself, and it has awakened me. I can't tell where it came from. Perhaps from the next room, perhaps from the lawn. I thought that I would just ask you whether you'd heard it. No, I have not. It must be those wretched gypsies at the plantation. Strange. Why? Yet, if it were on the lawn, I wonder that you did not hear it also. This is true. Well, it is of no great consequence at any rate. Good night, Helen. Sleep well. You too, Julia. See you in the morning. That was the last time I saw her alive. I heard her door lock and turned in for the night.
Was it normal for you both to lock yourselves in at night?
Always.
But why? Were you both afraid of Dr. Roylott?
Not him, his pets. My stepfather kept a cheetah and a baboon. We had no feeling of security unless our doors were locked. After what Julia said that night, I could not sleep. A vague feeling of impending misfortune was unsettling me. My sister and I... You will recollect we are twins, and you know how subtle are the links which bind 2 souls, which are so closely allied. It was a wild night. The wind was howling outside, and the rain was beating and splashing against the windows. Suddenly, amid all the chaos of the night, there burst forth a wild scream of a terrified woman. I knew that it was my sister's voice. I sprang from my bed, wrapped a shawl around me, and rushed into the corridor. As I opened my door, I seemed to hear a low whistle such as my sister described, and a few moments later, a clanging sound, as if a mass of metal had fallen. As I ran down the passage, my sister's door was unlocked and revolved slowly upon its hinges. I stared at it, horror-stricken, not knowing what was about to issue from it.
What was inside?
My sister, Mr. Holmes. By the light of the corridor lamp, I saw my sister appear in the opening. Her face blanched with terror, her hands groping for help, her whole figure swaying to and fro like that of a drunkard. I ran to her and threw my arms around her, but at that moment her knees seemed to give way, and she fell to the ground. She writhed as one who is in terrible pain, and her limbs were dreadfully convulsed. At first I thought she had not recognized me, but as I bent over her, she suddenly shrieked out in a voice I shall never forget. "Oh my God, Helen, it was the band! The Speckled band! Julia, what do you mean? Dr. Roylott's room, what do you mean? Speak to me!" She could not speak. She only pointed out at our stepfather's room. There was a fresh convulsion seized her hand and choked her words. I rushed out, calling loudly for my stepfather, and I met him hastening from his room in a dressing gown. When he reached my sister's side, she was unconscious, and though he poured brandy down her throat and sent for medical aid from the village, all efforts were in vain, for she slowly sank and died without having recovered her consciousness. Such was the dreadful end of my beloved sister.
Are you sure about this whistle and the metallic sound? Could you swear to it?
That was what the county coroner asked me at the inquiry. It is my strong impression that I heard it, and yet, among the crash of the gale and the creaking of an old house, I may have possibly been deceived.
Do not write out any possibilities. All avenues must be explored. Now, your sister, was she dressed?
She was in her nightdress. In her right hand was found the charred stump of a match, and in her left, a matchbox.
Showing that she struck a light and looked up at her when the alarm took place.
Precisely, Watson. That is important. And what conclusions did the coroner come to?
He investigated the case with great care, for Dr. Roylott's conduct had been notorious in the county, but he was unable to find any satisfactory cause of death. My evidence showed that the door had been fastened upon the inner side, and the windows were blocked by old-fashioned shutters with broad iron bars, which were secured every night. The walls were carefully sounded, and were shown to be quite solid all round, and the flooring was also thoroughly examined, with the same result. The chimney is wide, but it is barred up by 4 large staples. It is certain, therefore, that my sister was quite alone when she met her end. Besides, there were no marks of any violence upon her.
Poison?
Doctors examined her for it, but without success.
Then that settles it. We must make for Leatherhead immediately.
We said we'd meet Miss Stoner at London Waterloo. As Holmes put on his proper shoes and coat, he looked excited, too excited. I think a case like this was something he was waiting for. We got into our carriage and made our way to the train station. Holmes, what do you think killed this poor woman?
Logic would say pure fear and nervous shock, though what it was that frightened her I cannot imagine.
Miss Stoner mentioned gypsies at the plantation?
They are always nearly some there.
And this band, a speckled band?
Perhaps the wild talk of the gibberish, Watson. It would refer to a group of people, perhaps to these gypsies in the plantation. I do not know whether the spotted handkerchiefs, which so many of them wear over their heads, might have suggested the strange adjective that she used.
What do you think?
Whilst logic would dictate that Julia Stoner died of fright, I feel it is best that we meet Dr. Roylott and see the house for ourselves, Watson.
Agreed, Sherlock.
We should be arriving within the hour.
Excellent.
I can see that you are thinking deeply, Mr. Holmes.
These are very deep waters, Miss Stoner. I've had some time to think. Please tell me what happened after your sister's tragic death.
2 years have passed since then, and my life has been until lately lonelier than ever. A month ago, however, a dear friend, whom I have known for many years, has done me the honour to ask my hand in marriage. His name is Armitage, Percy Armitage.
The second son of Mr. Armitage of Crane Water, near Reading.
I did not realise you were familiar with them.
As my dear friend Watson knows, I make it my business to know as much as possible about everything.
It means sometimes he forgets the normal things.
I'm sure it does.
And how has your stepfather been with Percy?
Like Julia, he has offered no opposition to the match, and we are to be married in the course of the spring. However, 2 days ago, some repairs were started in the west wing of the building, and my bedroom wall has been pierced, so that I have to move into the chamber in which my sister died, and to sleep in the very bed in which she slept. Imagine then my thrill of terror when last night, as I lay awake thinking over her terrible fate, I heard suddenly, in the silence of the night, the low whistle which had been the herald of her own death. I sprang up and lit the lamp, but nothing was to be seen in the room. I was too shaken to go to bed again, however, so I dressed, and as soon as it was daylight I slipped down, got a dog cart at the Crown Inn, which is opposite, and drove to Leatherhead, from whence I have come on this morning, with the one object of seeing you and asking your advice.
I didn't realise how recent this all was.
These things usually are, Watson. The one revelation that can push someone over the edge to act.
Quite.
Have you told me everything?
Yes.
Miss Stoner, you have not. You are screening your stepfather.
What do you mean?
I can see that behind the frill of that black lace on your hand there are 5 livid spots, the marks of 4 fingers and a thumb, printed onto your wrist. Your stepfather is cruelly using you.
He is a hard man. He hardly knows his own strength.
A man should not hit a woman, Miss Stoner. I certainly look forward to meeting this man.
Do not make idle threats, Watson. This is a very deep business. Would it be possible for us to see over the rooms without knowledge of your stepfather?
As it happens, he spoke of coming into town today upon some most important business. It is probable that he will be away all day, and that there would be nothing to disturb you. We have a housekeeper now, but she is old and foolish. I could easily get her out of the way.
We then sat down and tried to put ourselves at ease for the duration of the train journey. However, that was all to change when we arrived at Leatherhead.
My driver will be just up here.
You stupid girl!
Stop right there!
I will do as I please.
Watson, do not antagonise the man. Please see to Helen. It appears she has been knocked unconscious. Dr. Roylott, I presume.
Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran.
Good. I am Sherlock Holmes.
I know who you are, and your services are not needed.
Do you usually physically abuse your stepdaughter in public?
I traced her to London. I know where she's been. She should know better.
And then you took an earlier train to beat us here. I see.
What has she been saying to you?
Just that it's a little cold for the time of year.
I said, what has she been saying to you?
Unlike your injured stepdaughter, I will not be so easy to bend. But I have heard that your strength is something to behold.
You put me off, do you? I know you, you scoundrel. I have heard of you before. You are the meddler.
You could say that.
Holmes, the busybody. The Scotland Yard Jack in the office.
Your conversation is most entertaining. When you leave, please see that you make our investigation easy.
Excuse me! I will let you go when I have said my say. Now don't you dare meddle in my affairs. I know that Miss Stoner has been there. I traced her. Now I'm a dangerous man to fall foul of. See here. See that you keep yourself out of my grip.
Oh, I'm afraid that won't be possible, Dr. Roylott of Stoke Moran.
What are you doing?
Just letting the witnesses know who you are.
Don't test me, Peeler.
You came just in time, sir. As you can see, I've been physically assaulted, as has this young woman.
Come down to the police station.
What?
Don't make a scene.
Watson, how is Miss Stoner?
No broken bones, Holmes. She's just had the wind knocked out of her.
Does she require any hospital treatment?
None.
Then we must make way for Stoke Moran.
I carried Miss Stoner into her motor car, and her driver escorted us to the house itself. Upon arrival, I laid her down on the sofa in the living room. It was then she began to awaken and ask what had happened.
What happened?
We have had the pleasure of making the doctor's acquaintance.
What? How?
You wouldn't have remembered, Miss Stoner. We barely had any time to react. He arrived and slapped you down to the ground in moments.
That explains the pain. So, he was aware I had come to see you.
So it appears.
He is so cunning that I never know when I am safe from him. What will he say when he returns?
He is currently being held in police custody. There are many witnesses to this crime.
It wasn't a crime.
It was, Miss Stoner. He should not be doing this to you. Whether privately or publicly, he is wrong.
Nonetheless, he must guard himself, for he may find that there is someone more cunning than him upon his track. Now, we must make the best use of our time, so kindly take us, at once, to one of the rooms which we are to examine.
Surely when she has recovered, Holmes.
We do not know if or when the police will release him, Watson. We cannot waste time.
It's all right. I'll get up.
Are you sure?
Perfectly.
This is the room where you used to sleep?
Yes. The centre one is my sister's, which I now have to sleep in whilst works are going on in here.
Then the one next to the main building to Dr. Roylott's?
Yes, Dr. Watson.
May I?
Of course.
I don't believe that there are any repairs to be made to this wall.
I agree. I believe that it was an excuse to move me from my room.
Ah, that is suggestive. Now, on the other side of this narrow wing runs a corridor from which these 3 rooms open. There are windows in this, of course.
Yes, but too narrow for anyone to pass through.
And with your doors locked and the windows too narrow, both rooms were unapproachable from those sides. My theory certainly presents some difficulties. No one could pass these shutters if they were bolted. Well, we shall see if the inside throws any light upon the matter. May we see your sister's room?
Of course. Follow me.
The bell? Who does it communicate with? It looks new.
It's only a couple of years old. It goes to the housekeeper's room.
Did your sister use it often?
No. We used to always get what we wanted for ourselves.
It seems so unnecessary to put so nice a bell pull there.
It was my stepfather's idea.
May I use it?
Of course. But you may disturb the housekeeper.
Very well.
A silent bell?
It's a dummy.
Are you sure?
I am. It's not even attached to a wire, which is very interesting. You can see now that it's fastened to a hook just above the little opening or for the ventilator.
I've never noticed that before. How strange.
Strange indeed. There are 1 or 2 very singular points about this room. For example, what a fool a builder must be to open a ventilator into another room, when, with the same trouble, he may have communicated with the outside air.
That is quite modern.
Done about the same time as the bell rope?
Yes, there were several little changes carried out about that time.
Very odd. Dummy bell ropes, and ventilators which do not ventilate.
Quite, Watson. Now, Miss Stoner, with your permission, we shall now carry out the researches into the inner apartment.
Of course. Follow me.
Miss Stoner led us down to Dr. Roylott's chamber. It was larger than his stepdaughter's arrangements. However, it was plainly furnished. A camp bed, a small wooden shelf full of books, mostly of a technical character, an armchair beside the bed, a plain wooden chair against the wall, a round table, and a large iron safe were the principal things which met the eye. Holmes was more interested in the safe that Dr. Roylott was keeping.
What's in here, Miss Stoner?
business papers.
You've seen before?
Once a few years ago, I remember that it was full of papers.
There isn't a cat inside, for example.
A cat?
No, what an absurd idea.
Well, look at this.
A saucer of milk?
But we don't have a cat, only the cheetah and the baboon.
Ah, of course. Well, a cheetah is just a big cat, and yet a saucer of milk does not go very far in satisfying its wants, I dare say. There is one point which I should wish to determine.
Very well.
Watson and I shall remain hidden in the small outhouse on the other side of the grounds. We shall keep an eye on the house, and you signal us at the right opportunity.
What opportunity is that?
When everyone has retired for the night, and you are sure everyone is asleep,
I shall try.
ensure that you lock your bedroom door immediately. We will make our way to the outhouse. Warn the staff that Roylott will be especially angry today, as I suspect he will be allowed to return home any minute.
I'll do that, I promise, Mr. Holmes.
The plan was in motion. Holmes and I rushed to the outhouse, and as we got settled, we saw Dr. Roylott return home, angry as ever. We prayed for Miss Stoner's safety. We could see her in her bedroom from where we were. She was safe, for now. Night fell, then we saw the signal. Miss Stoner had lit a small candle by the side of her window. Holmes deduced as she was a light sleeper, the candle would keep her awake, so we moved in.
Come along, Watson. We must be careful in these grounds.
Quite so, Holmes, quite so.
Freeze, Watson!
My God. Did you see it?
It was the baboon. I had forgotten the strange pets which the doctor affected.
There was a cheetah too.
Perhaps we might find it upon our shoulders any moment. We must be swift, Watson. We're nearing Dr. Roylott's chambers. Freeze!
I am well and truly frozen, Holmes.
Up there, the light through the ventilator.
Yes, I see.
And the smell of boiling oil. The metallic smell also.
I am noticing a correlation, Holmes.
The whistling is in the house, Watson. Come along. Do you see it, Watson?
I see nothing.
It's all over, Watson.
What does that mean, Holmes?
I suggest we visit Dr. Roylott's chamber. Watson, you may need your pistol.
Good God. He's dead, Holmes.
So it wasn't my stepfather. It was someone else.
Perhaps. We know he certainly didn't kill himself, but the weapon used may have turned on him.
What do you mean?
There is no weapon here, Holmes.
Look up.
Oh my God!
Remain calm, Miss Stoner.
A snake. A bloody snake.
It's a swamp adder, the deadliest snake in India. Dr. Roylott has died within 10 seconds of being bitten. Violence does, in truth, recoil upon the violent, and the schemer falls into the pit which he digs for another. Let us thrust this creature back into its den, and we can then remove Miss Stoner to some place of shelter and let the county police know what has happened.
Watch out, Holmes. It could still climb up your cane and bite you.
I am assisting it, Watson. The cane will provide a suitable distance.
So that's what was in the safe.
Quite.
The man is certainly dead, Holmes. There are 2 puncture marks on his wrist.
Any man could have told you that, Watson.
But how did you solve this?
I had come to this conclusion, which shows how dangerous it always is to reason from insufficient data. The presence of the gypsies and the use of the word band, which was used by the poor girl, no doubt, to explain the appearance of which she had caught in a hurried glimpse of her light from the match. This was sufficient to put me upon an entirely wrong scent.
Well, she didn't have much time to explain, Holmes.
I agree, but the speckled band gave me enough clues. It became clear to me that whatever danger threatened an occupant of that room could not have come from either the window or the door. My attention was speedily drawn, as I've already remarked to you, to this ventilator, and to the bell rope which hung down to the bed. The discovery was made that when this was a dummy, that the bed was clamped to the floor, it instantly gave me a rise to suspicion that the rope was there as a bridge for something passing through the hole and coming to the bed. The idea of the snake instantly occurred to me, and when I coupled it with my knowledge that the doctor was furnished with a supply of creatures from India, I felt that I was probably on the right track. The idea of using a form of poison which could not possibly be discovered by any chemical test was just such as one that would occur to a clever and ruthless man who had an Eastern training.
The poisonous snake!
Precisely. Quick-acting poison that disappears from the body within moments. It would be a sharp-eyed coroner, indeed, who could distinguish the two little dark punctures which would show where the poison fangs had done their work. But then I thought of the whistle. Of course, he must recall the snake before the morning light revealed it to the victim. He had trained it, probably by the use of milk which we saw, to return to him when summoned. He would put it through this ventilator at the hour that he thought best, and with the certainty that it would crawl down the rope and land on the bed. It might or might not bite the occupant. Perhaps she might escape every night for a week, but sooner or later she must fall a victim.
But the ventilators, how do you know they were used?
An inspection of his chair showed me that he had been in the habit of standing on it, which of course would be necessary in order to make sure that he could reach the ventilator. The sight of that safe, the saucer of milk, and the loop of whipcord were enough to finally dispel any doubts which may have remained. The metallic clang heard by Miss Stoner was obviously caused by her stepfather hastily closing the door of the safe upon its terrible occupant. Having once made up my mind, you know the steps which I took in order to put the matter to proof. I heard the creature hiss, as I have no doubt that you did also, and I instantly lit the light and attacked it.
With the result of driving it through the ventilator.
And also with the result of causing it to turn upon its master at the other side. Some of the blows of my cane came home and roused its snakish temper, so that it flew upon the first person that it saw. In this way I am in no doubt indirectly responsible for Dr. Grimsby Roylott's death, and I cannot say that it is likely to weigh very heavily upon my conscience.
The next morning, Holmes and I left for Baker Street. Miss Helen Stoner did not speak to us again. In fact, she had the face of regret. Perhaps her regret was this case ending in her stepfather's death. Perhaps the regret lied with Sherlock's closing remarks. Nonetheless, 3 weeks later, we received a letter saying that Helen Stoner has become the lady of the house, and her marriage to Percy Armitage is still going ahead. I was happy for them. Sherlock seemed to turn away from the letter. Perhaps the death of Dr. Roylott did weigh heavily on his conscience. More than he'd like to admit.